Let's create a context and a little hook that encapsulates the logic that it's going to use. I'll create a new file called bookingFlowContext, and I will paste this in. Let's quickly go over this. So what this does is basically it creates a context here. So create context is the React function, and that creates a context of the type bookingFlowContext, which is specified just above here. The bookingFlowContext type basically has two primary things. So there are some methods or some functions and some state. It will provide onGoBack and onProceed, which will allow the user to go back and forth in the flow. And then there's the state, which is of type bookingFlowState, which is defined right above here as well. And that is basically where we're going to store whatever the user enters throughout the flow. So their chosen date and their email address and so on. We don't have any of that right now, and that's why I'm just using this empty object. And you can see I'm getting a linter error here because supposedly just a double quote or curly brackets isn't good for specifying the empty object. So what I'll do is just disable this for now because we're going to be changing it in a minute when we start adding some state to it. But right now, the final thing that this has is an update state function, and that will take some fields that are whatever be in this booking flow state. So it doesn't need to be all of it, but can be parts of it, and they will update the state with those. We then create the context, and we need to create it with some default values. And the reason why I'm setting this to CTX missing, which is a function that I've created right here. Sometimes I create this as a shared helper function because it's useful for almost any context. If we don't specify a default value, we will have to check for undefined everywhere where we're consuming this context, which is annoying and just adds a bunch of TypeScript plumbing. So it's nicer to specify the default value and say there will always be something. And then if we know that we're not going to run into a situation where there's no provider around, we can safely just set this, which will throw an error on runtime if we should have created an error somewhere. As state, it will just have the empty object. Finally, we then have this hook, and basically it takes a parameter called flow, which is an array of functional components. So these are basically going to be the pages that the user can switch back and forth from. And so we've moved the active page index and set active page index state in here away from the component itself. And then we've also moved this state in here, which is currently just the empty object, but we'll improve on that later on. What we then do is we create this memoized value that is being fed into the context provider. So one thing to note here is that I'm creating a component live in this hook. And that is definitely a design choice on my part. You may dislike this way of doing it, and there are many other ways of doing it, but this works as it is. So I just went with this. What it does is basically it takes the provider for the context and uses this value that we've memoized here. And then it puts the contents as a child for that. And the contents is whatever page we were looking at given our current index. So basically, by doing so, we can be sure that whatever page we put into the flow array here, they can safely consume this provider because they will always be wrapped inside of it. The value that we're using here is basically, so onGoBack and onProceed are self-explanatory. Those are similar to what we had before. The state value is just this state that we're setting here. And then we have update state, which will set state with whatever it was before and then some whatever new fields we might have added. So it basically just combines those two objects. We then, in the end, return an object that contains this page, the active page index, and the set active page index. So that is basically a utility function that we can use. And we may choose to do so, or we may choose to rely strictly on the go back and proceed functions. We can now change our component to use this hook instead. We'll get rid of this. Instead, we will fetch everything from our hook. So we need to get the page, the active page index, and the set active page index. Call use booking flow to specify our flow, and we don't have that yet. So let's just quickly define that. That will simply be these pages. Just say choose type page, choose date page, and enter email page. That is our flow for now. So we're not using these anywhere. First of all, this conditional stuff can go now because we just need to show the page here. And now these buttons, Well, they're actually failing. We need to change this to active page index. These are called active page index as well. So this should do it for now. Let's just get rid of these. There we go. We still have the server running, so let's try and see what things look like at this point. We can still go back and forth through these, and we can still go further. This actually fails now. I'm not completely sure why, but other than that, everything works the way it used to.
If you want to keep learning about how to build real-world apps with the latest technologies and other career-related topics, then start right now by subscribing to our channel and liking this video.